Frank Nostein was one of the most prominent individuals who made the study of population an institutional practice. He was a member of the American Eugenics Society, the American Philosophical Society, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Nostein also served as president of John D. Rockefeller's Population Council after Frederick Osborn stepped down. He was also the first director of the United Nations Population Division from 1946 to 1948. In a 1969 paper written by Nostein titled The Problem of Population Control, he outlines a strategy to depopulate target populations. Nostein admits that economic modernization would bring the birth rate down automatically. However, he goes on to state that more drastic measures must be taken because in his opinion this method would not be fast enough. He writes, "Given existing preferences in family size, governments must go beyond voluntary family planning. To achieve zero rate of population growth, governments will have to do more than control, they will have to coerce. To impose more drastic changes on a large scale implies many risks, not least to the regime that undertakes them. The price for this type of population control may well be in the institution of a totalitarian regime." Guy Irving Birch, who wrote for Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger's birth control review publication, also played a key role. Birch's 1947 book, Human Breeding and Survival, combines many of the ideas of both eugenics and population control. Birch states, "It appears what the United Nations need to do is to recommend to all nations adoption of laws which will actually lead to the sterilization of all persons who are inadequate, either biologically or socially, and encourage the voluntary sterilization of normal persons who have had their share of children." David Rockefeller, the son of John D. Rockefeller Jr., is the current patriarch of the family. His avid support of population reduction and control programs was evident during a speech given in 1994 in New York City.
Ironically, however, the very innovations that are making possible dramatic improvements in human well-being are also creating new problems which raise the specter of an alarming and possibly catastrophic disaster to the biosphere we live in. And herein lies the dilemma that we all face. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident.
The prospect of eugenics under the guise of environmentalism was brought up by an informed audience member during a televised debate on global warming in the United Kingdom. Perhaps not surprisingly, the question was immediately shot down as being irrelevant.
There is a question right up the back there. We'll take that one first. At the very back.
Me?
Yes.
I'd like to take the debate into another question. I mean, we've been debating the science here. We've not debated anything in terms of the credibility of the environmentalist movement. The environmentalist movement was formed by Sir Julian Huxley, who was the founder of the Eugenics Society. The WWF and these other organisations are actually offspins from that Eugenics Society. Now, what Martin Durkin is saying, that this has huge implications for the developing countries. Is that the intention behind this whole environmentalist scam behind global warming swindle?
Look, I'll just quickly throw that one to Greg Bourne, since he is an environmentalist and a former businessman.
I think if I were to talk to my colleagues in Nepal, Bhutan, the Congo, those parts which are very, very poor, those colleagues in China, colleagues in India, the world has moved on from that debate. This is a very, very sophisticated, understanding group of people who are passionately caring about people and the environment and the economy.
Population control by vaccination was suggested in Henry Kissinger's 1974 National Security Study Memorandum 200. The document cites injectable contraceptives for women as a possible method of population reduction and control. Depopulation, as stated in the document, should be pursued, wherever a lessening of population pressures can increase the prospects of such stability. population policy becomes relevant to resource supplies and to the economic interests of the United States.
This may be the most notorious document in the history of the United States, and I'll show you why. It's the National Security Study Memorandum 200, Kissinger report, who was the director of the NSC and Secretary of State, submitted this document to Nixon in '74, I think, just a couple years after the Rockefeller Commission report. Now, it's interesting, Kissinger was a protege of Rockefeller. He came up through the ranks and was assisted a great deal, so I'm told. It was declassified in '89, so it was top secret for several years. The focus was, again, population growth, but on the international scene. Their goals were to have a replacement fertility in developing countries in 1985, and replacement fertility in the lesser developed countries by 2000. So they're actually going to take their program to developed countries first, and then export it to the lesser developed countries. It doesn't make sense because they're more concerned, but I think my interpretation now, knowing what I'm going to tell you next, is I think they needed to be a home base, work out this place where they had control, rather than go to a foreign land and try to work out how they're going to instill propaganda to reduce population. Let's work in our home territory. We control the media. We control the healthcare system. That was probably what they were thinking. They identified target nations they were going to use. They wanted to enlist multinational organizations. Legalize abortion was key. Financial incentives, propaganda, and even coercion were to be used. Well, we have another obvious question. Yeah, there's national and global population control policies, no question. Have they been implemented? The first I heard about this organization was this article by Lisa Regan, and I talked to her on the phone when she wrote this. She was talking about vaccines, politics, and mercuries, and she just tripped into the global scene by mentioning that one of these committee members, the IOM committee members, was a member of Gavi. This is something called an organization called Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. Let's look at Gavi a little bit closer. Who are they? Their goals, it's an organization which has encompassed all the international efforts for the last 50 years, 60 years plus, to immunize the world. Their goals are to vaccinate, and this is all they do. They don't provide cod liver oil, they don't provide water, sanitation, this is vaccines. This is what they do. They want to improve the health of the poorest 70 nations by vaccination, every aspect, development, implementation, and so forth. They were launched in '99 by Bill Gates with $750 million. They have over $5 billion committed. A $4 billion commitment was just given this fall in September by several European nations. Their goal is $12 to $15 billion. So this isn't chump change. This is a serious organization. They want to give the usual vaccines to third world, some of the ones we don't get here, yellow fever and so forth, oral polio, which we no longer give. They're comprised of government agencies in both countries, so it's bilateral, developing governments and developed governments. NGOs, World Health Organization, UNICEF, World Bank, private organizations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and industry, the vaccine manufacturers. Now this list looks familiar. I've seen this somewhere before. Here's the NSSM statement. Here's who they said they were going to use 30 years ago to reduce population. World Bank, World Health, UNICEF, UN Population Fund, donor countries, private groups, etc. It's the same thing. Maybe a wild coincidence. Well, let's look at Gavi a little closer. They have supporting nations, and there's the list, USA, Canada, and the Anglo-European countries. It's an Anglo organization. And the recipient nations are, I would say, non-Anglo, for the most part. And the money we're talking, Uganda, 92 million, Nigeria, 81 million. So there's some big money. And in fact, Nigeria, I will say, was number one on the list for NSSM. They were really concerned about growth in Nigeria, leading Africa. So it doesn't surprise me that Gavi is vaccinating the heck out of Nigeria. Comparing the target lists, NSSM, their targets, for Gavi, their recipients. The list isn't identical, but this is 30 years apart. So it's similar. I think no one would argue it's a similar list of third world countries. Now, NSSM picked 13 nations. Gavi, they want them all, 70 poor nations.